All right, welcome to another episode of Anime Village. We present the Behind the Background with Bryan Soroka, our co-founder and chief. Man, what is it? Chief, your chief lore expert, yeah, right?
Lore officer.
Officer,
That's the
chief,
cute title for the guy who does a lot of writing. Pretty
yeah,
much.
chief
That's
lore,
what I do.
chief lore officer. We're back with another episode where we're giving you insights and backgrounds in writing and what it's like to write a manga and what goes in the daily life of what Bryan does and his ideas and what he works. And today we're doing with character relationships and building dynamics and chemistry because that's awesome. That's a huge part, and I think there's two different parts of that I like too with the building of the dynamics and chemistry is the role characters, but also connecting with the reader and the chemistry that you have with the reader. Bryan, so thanks so much for joining us on this episode.
Thanks for having me yet again.
Yeah, no problem. I want to know first of all, like, how do you, when you're writing and everything, you have the main character, but what's it like to create that main character's chemistry with our readers and like give them the insight of what it feels like to, be connected to this character?
Sure. So I'm a big fan of contrast when it comes to characters specifically. So really that's getting disparate kind of personalities, backgrounds, experiences, right? Because it's through conflict that we get our most interesting scenes, whether it's action, but also through dialogue, right? So if you're having a conversation between two very different people, obviously their points of view are going to be wildly different, and how they approach things and how they discuss those things is going to be quite different. So it's really, on one hand, you have Shinichi Tanzo, who's our chief protagonist from Adamanto. He's a very stoic, traditional, not very talkative. So he just likes to put his head down and get down to business. But then when you team him up with Fuma Kataro, who's like his right hand samurai, and who's very chatty, loves talking about his accomplishment, isn't shy from the spotlight. You get some really, really cool dynamics and how they play off one another and the conversations that they have. So that's like a small example of how I like to create the characters and how they're so very different in a lot of cases. But you also have some, other characters that are a bit more similar. I would say Oda Nobunaga, who is the Yamato clan's war sovereign or chief of war. He's more similar to Shinichi, where he's kind of like more all business. He doesn't like to talk too much, although he's not quite as closeted as Shinichi is. He's a bit more prone to talk, but yeah, I mean that's really how I approach characters. I like to have some distinction between them to create that sense of conflict.
That's awesome. And what's it like to create the chemistry between the protagonist and antagonist? Like, how do you continue to build a connection between the two, and like, how do you create that chemistry and the dynamic between those two guys?
Well, I actually think it's the opposite of chemistry. It's like these guys do not get along, right? Because really, I mean, where's the fun in that? Although, there is something to be said about having some similar characteristics between your villains and your heroes, right? Because that's how they can kind of come to an understanding of what the other one is doing, and really kind of you can draw some interesting parallels between them. But really, if you look at so you have Shinichi, who's like I said, the chief protagonist, and he heads up the Yamato clan, and who go out to bang heads with three prime factions that rule supreme in 12th century,
Yeah,
right? So you have the the Tang dynasty from the Chang'an province in China, and then you have the Caliphate, who are in the Middle East, and then finally you have the Byzantines, who are kind of like they reside in Greece, but they're also in Turkey. So I thought that was a really cool approach, because I guess the most similar between those four factions would be the Yamato and the Tang, simply because they're of Asian descent, right? So you can draw a lot of similarities between Chinese culture and Japanese culture, though they are wildly different. I don't want to upset anyone saying, no, these are just the same. No, but they are, of Asian descent. So there are some similarities. And then you kind of compare Yamato to the Byzantines and to the Caliphate, and you couldn't get much more different than that, right?
yeah.
And where kind of like those really interesting beats come into play, and where their traditions and their backgrounds have highly influenced how they go about building their empires and dealing with others. And it's just really, really cool to get all of those different points of views, and seeing how they deal with all these different circumstances that they're faced with.
When you bring in those three main like protagonists of cultures, how do, like, when you building those dynamics and the chemistry, but also bringing in the history, so like someone who is maybe of Chinese descent like can relate, like looking at that character, be like, oh, that's my history, or even just for someone that's in the history, what's it like to build that in there too, of those characters as well, and put it in the manga.
Yeah, the angle I took with the Yamato clan and the Tang dynasty is that they recognize their similarities,
Yeah.
and this kind of creates another kind of conflict where it's like, I'm better than you are, right? Our history is richer than yours, right? Like,
Yeah.
don't compare us to these guys, because there really is no comparison. So you have the Emperor Gaozu, who's like, yeah, like these Yamotos are just like, I won't even bother with them, right? We'll sick our 250-foot Titan after them.
Yeah.
And then you have the Byzantines again, and then you have the Caliphate, who are just so wildly different that they don't really look at the conflict that way. It's just kind of like, you're an interloper, right? You're like invading us, and we won't have it. So that's how they breed their conflict.
Yeah, that's awesome that you're able to do that. And what's it like to create real emotions between the characters and have them have that chemistry, but like also just create that real emotion and put it on paper? I'm always interested about that, because it's always like a weird thing. I feel like when you're writing on paper, like, how do I put this out? But how do you put that on paper?
Yeah, well, I approach that from different levels. So you've got interactions that people can readily relate to, right? If it's just a confrontation between two people, they're having an argument. We've all had arguments with other people. So that's, easy to relate to. But then you have when characters are faced with fantastical situations, right? Like, I don't know about, I can't speak on your behalf, but I know I've never, faced a 250-foot, 200-ton Titan before. So how do you kind of, how does someone deal with that? How does someone react to that, right? So there's a scene where Shinichi has captured the emperor, and they're on a warboat. They're getting ready to head back home. Then all of a sudden they hear this howl, and they turn around and they see this mammoth Godzilla-like creature coming to get them. Like, what's your reaction? Obviously, it's surprise, but you've got to kind of temper that with, well, Shinichi's reaction is, well, yeah, this is something that I haven't seen before, but maybe I will give the Nexus a try, which is the Nexus of Adamanto, which he puts on for the first time to battle the Titan. But really, like, it's my roundabout way of saying, you've got to figure there's all these different levels of reaction, but how do you get to those? And that's why I've commented on this before. I use my bus stop theory, right?
Yeah.
Where you have Thor, you have an average person, and you have maybe some despot like Kim Jong Un or whatever waiting for a bus. How do they react to that, right? Based on their previous, stories, if they're a fictional character or if they're a real person, you've seen news clips or whatever, and you kind of draw your conclusions from there.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I always love the bus stop theory. I think that was like one of the favorite things I ever heard you.
I can't remember where I heard that from before, but I just thought it was just such a cool, unique, but still even a very pedestrian kind of setting, but it so gets the job done, right? Whenever I'm stuck, whenever I'm trying to figure out, okay, here's a character that's faced with this supernatural presence or this unbelievable situation or circumstance, how do they react to that? So then I go back to it all the time, and it's like, okay, this is how they would react to that situation. So how can we kind of take that and figure out how they react to this absolutely bug nut situation, right? It
Yeah, right.
works sometimes, it doesn't work all the time, but for the most part, I think it's pretty reliable.
Yeah, it is. It is very reliable. It's a funny thing, but it's a good way to think about how a character react to certain situations. Um, Creating a relationship too with like the main character and like a side character, or even the protagonist, and like, so we have Lord Lord Kami with Abe and like seeing their relationship and building their dynamics with chemistry. And the same thing with Shinichi, and you kind of touched upon it with Fuma. What's it like to put these guys together in the same room? Like how can you create an Abe to work off of a Kami, or like create a Fuma to work off of like a Shinichi, like those side characters that don't really steal the show, but they worked well with the Kamis and the Shinichis.
Well, again, it's kind of like you have to take their background and their abilities and their experiences into account, right? So, for instance, like I mentioned before, Shinichi is while he's very proficient, like he's a bladesmith, he's a master horseman, he's a master samurai, and then when he puts on the Nexus of Adamanto, like everything is just magnified a
Right.
hundredfold, right? So, but even still, he's quite he doesn't have an ego, right? He's not like brash, and he's not like strutting around like a peacock. So no matter, really, I mean, I thought that was kind of a cool take on the characters. No matter what situation he's faced with, or no matter how powerful he might become, his character remains the same. And there are people like that, right? they
Yeah.
they they just don't change no matter what happens. But then you have characters, you mentioned Lord Kami, who is the god of iron, who leads up the Yamoto clan. He's a total dick, right? Like, and he's supremely powerful. He's also a master bladesmith, but even, better than Shinichi, more capable than Shinichi. And he's like this near 9 foot, 2,000 pound dude who's encased in iron. He knows that he's very powerful. He knows that he leads up one of the most powerful sects in 12th century, and he's not shy about telling people about that or proving it to them should they disagree with him or try and get in his way. And then you have him, and then Abe no Semi, who is this master magician, right? One of the most powerful in all the realms. And even, he's on the level like with Merlin, who appears in chapter 5, I want to say. But, I keep dropping these hints, but I'm just excited about telling people about it. Anyway, you have Abe, who is quite similar to Lord Kami in that he knows that he is this extremely powerful, capable individual, right? Just in a different way. He draws his power from magic, and then you have Kami, who is influence and physical kind of prowess. But when the two kind of interact, and there are quite a few interactions between the two, you can sense that tension between them. It's like Abe thinks Cammy is like this blowhard, just big mouth, like, you're really nothing, because he doesn't understand. He tells Lord Kami when Kami gets this idea of taking Harpe, which is Perseus's sword, which is made of adamantine, and fusing it with a corrupted form of blood magic to create the Nexus of Adamanto. Abe no Semi is like, you don't know what you're messing with. Don't do this. I'm giving you my final warning. And then Kami kind of like sneers at him and says, look, I realize you're like the most powerful magician, ever to step out of here since Doctor Strange. He doesn't say Doctor Strange, but I'm just trying to draw that parallel. Cammy says, speak to me like that again, and it's going to be the last words out of your mouth.
Right.
So you have these guys that know, at least Cammy thinks he knows, but Abe no Semi knows a lot more, because he's dealt with like Akuma's demons of like such power levels that Cammy would, just pales in comparison. So, but he's still careful, because he knows that Cammy is the leader of the Yomoto clan, and he doesn't want to, upturn all those apple carts, because it's just not worth it, right? It's like he knows Cammy will never see the light, so why even bother?
Right, right, exactly. Well, it's an awesome dynamic between the two, and when you read it, you can definitely feel that tension. I know we touched upon it in a couple other podcasts between the two of those two characters, and in creating and building a dynamic and chemistry as well, like for like small side stopping in villages or characters, building that dynamic and that tier of the main character maybe making a connection with that how or having that chemistry with a small village, or getting the reader get that chemistry to like you feel for this village and what's going on. Like how do you get something like that brought onto paper as well too?
Well, that's just really, I mean, those are the most human of all the characters, and
Yeah.
thus the most relatable, right? So
Right.
again, you just gotta kind of try and put yourself in that position. So there's a scene in the book where General Guang, who is Emperor Gaozu's from the Tang dynasty's head honcho in the military. He runs into Gaozu's private study and he goes, yeah, we have a little bit of a problem with our Titan, Shijimori, which is the name of the Titan, that 250-foot, 200-ton monstrosity. And then the Emperor says, well, what's the problem? And then the general says, well, we've seemed to have misplaced it. And then he goes, how the hell do you misplace, like, an engine of destruction, the size of a building? And then the general says, I don't know, but I'm going to go find out. And then the emperor kind of laughs and he goes, I've been having a bit of fun with you.
Yeah.
And he says, I'm trying to remember the exact dialogue, how it goes along. We cut to a small village, just maybe about 20 kilometers outside of Chang'an. And, the villagers are going about their work, doing their daily thing. And then we have a voiceover. In this case, it's a script. We have a caption from Gaozu saying, our resident Titan has quite the appetite. And, livestock cattle is so very expensive nowadays.
Yeah.
So I charged the Titan's custodians with finding a more economical source of nutrition. And as that caption is going on, we see the villagers looking up and they're engulfed in this huge shadow with these like huge clawed hand going on. So in other words, Gaozu doesn't want to spend the money on cattle.
Yeah.
He's going to have the Titan eat these villagers, right?
Yeah.
So not only is it a really cool as balls scene, it's also giving you a lot of insight into Gaozu's character, where he thinks he's up here, even though he's a regular human, and he thinks, these peasants are down there, like they're Titan fodder, right? He actually sent this thing out to go eat for them because he didn't want to spend the money on cattle, right?
Yeah.
So what is their reaction? Well, it's not too good because they're just about to get eaten. But yeah, those are kind of like how you intersperse. And there's another cool scene with Shinichi. He's walking down a market. He doesn't have any money, but this woman who's manning like this fruit stand recognizes him and knows that he's taken down the Tang dynasty. So she offers him this nashi pear, right? There's like all these kind of like that's the one really cool thing about manga as well, where you have like these extraordinary events and circumstances and these big bombastic fight sequences, and then you have these cool human moments, right? Whether it's between regular people or these extraordinary characters, but it's still like those human kind of moments that allow us to make more of a connection, a stronger connection with these characters and relate to them on a different level, which is very, very important. Although you've got to be kind of clever about the way you construct these scenes, because they can get a bit long and boring in certain instances.
Right. Well, it is. I think that's like one of the, and I think we've always touched upon it on podcasts we've been done together, is how manga always, makes the human element connection, and like how you get more relatable to the characters, and there's no really anything political driven in there, but it just makes you relate more to the characters, feel more attached to those characters. And it's
and that's and that's what's kind of, I guess, irking me, for lack of a better word, about the industry as it's growing and growing, which is, it's not the growth that's bothering me. It's that you've got a lot of publishers coming out of the woodwork, coming out with alleged, manga titles, which are just really Western comic books in manga clothing.
Right.
Simply because the way they tell the story is the Western way of telling the story. And we've covered this before, where Western comic books, TV shows, movies, it's all plot driven, right? Each scene, each interaction is meant to move the plot forward in some way, shape, or form. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a great way to tell a story. It's the classic way of telling a story. But where manga and anime really differ is they don't, not that they don't give a shit about plots and stories, because some of the plots and stories are really cool, but what they're more concerned with and what they more focus upon is the interaction between the characters, right? It's focusing on them and creating that relationship with the reader or with the viewer, right? So when something does happen to them, good or bad, the character, the reader or the viewer can identify and really feels that, right? There's that emotional connection between them. And that's, I can read a book and tell you whether this is like a manga book or whether this is a comic book, right? I think there really is a distinction, and sometimes it's a bit more subtle than in other instances, but there is that difference. And that's what I think the key difference is between the two.
Yeah, yeah, seriously. Like I like even in anime, like Gundam Wing, for example, it was Endless Waltz, the movie. I always like there was always a scene that was kind of you kind of made a huge connection with Hiro Yui, the character. And like the way he when he blew up a colony, he saw this girl and the dog playing, and he like blew up in a section of the colony or whatever, and like it ended up killing the dog and the girl, and he ended up carrying like I don't know, said puppy around. And he just felt like the character like there like you could tell the characters had there's enough like had enough of war, and you could kind of feel those emotions of like without even saying anything. It was just a scene where he just like you could see they had enough. And it's interesting that you can make that connection, like not make the connection. I haven't been to war, so I don't know, but like make the connection with the character just saying like this is amazing, like I feel bad for what he's going through in this situation. So
Yeah.
it's crazy how anime makes you feel that way.
Yeah, and by and large, if you're not a writer, or if you're not involved in the creative process and storytelling in some way, shape, or form, you might not even be aware that that's happening, which
Yeah.
is really cool, right? Because but you still feel it, and that's why I think by and large, if you look at the manga market and the anime market, and then you look at comic books and you look at Western serialized shows, if you did a percentage, I don't know, obviously it's subjective, so you couldn't come at a hard and fast number, but the percentage of good manga and good anime is far higher than the percentage of comic books and Western shows insofar as quality is
Right.
concerned. Right. And again, you'll have people that'll argue that point. That's fine. But if you look at the recent output from, the Marvels, the DCs, other shows, like The Witcher and some of these other ones, where it's like, people are not happy. Lord of the Rings is another good example where it's kind of like, yeah, what the hell are these guys doing? Like
Yeah.
they're just not, they're not respecting the characters, they're not respecting the stories and the creators that came before them. I've always been a big flag waver of respecting the canon and respecting past creators. Whereas, some people, I was reading this article, I think it was the VP of production for Marvel, where he mentioned that it's a red flag for him when a writer when they're thinking of hiring writers, and then a writer would tell them that they're a Marvel fan. That's a red flag for him.
Really.
And it's like, what? And it's like he further explained that they wanted fresh eyes on the characters and on the stories, which you could kind of, okay, that's kind of a point, but at the same time, would you go into surgery with a guy that, has never picked up a scalpel before?
Yeah, right.
Right. It's
Right.
I know that's kind of that's a comparison it's a bit out there, but at the same time it's like, no, you need people that understand these characters, that know their history, that have been there. And what's wrong with loving them? I mean, I love this stuff to death. That's why, you can feel that love. I always say you can feel the love in the book or in the show, right? You can always tell when people are creating something that they truly have passion for, and other guys that are mailing it in,
Right.
right?
Exactly. And I mean, I mean, you can feel it when when I talk to you as well, too, how excited you get when you're mentioning scenes, and you can't wait to like put it out there for everyone to see
Yeah, man.
too.
It's like I believe it or not, I'm a very quiet person. I'm an extreme introvert. I always tell people that, but when I start talking about this stuff, I become unhinged. It's like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde effect. But yeah, so that's why I always say, if I go on too long, shut me up and get to the next question.
No, I love it. I mean, it's awesome how passionate you are, and it's great to see everything that you're creating. I can't wait to see more down the line of what's going to happen in Adamanto. Very excited. I know I've got some insight, but
Some crazy shit is about to go down. Yeah, it's absolutely nuts.
yeah, yeah, it's awesome. But you can tell when you build it and you're building it out, you are building that character relationships and building that dynamics, but and the chemistry. But it's all with all your love and passion coming through it. So making the reader get attached to it, and we're gonna love it. And I know I love it from reading the first chapter that's out there, and it's awesome. And just how much, and you can feel the tension between characters and the characters like vibe and how they
Yeah.
are. It's awesome.
Well, like I said, it's tip of the iceberg. Things definitely get ratcheted up, and that's another thing that I've always been a big fan of with storytelling. It's really, it doesn't matter what you're talking about, whether it's a book, whether it's a comic book, whether it's a movie, whether it's a TV show, whatever the medium is. You can really break down storytelling into three components, right? You have a situation, you have an escalation, and then you have a resolution. I don't
Right.
care who's writing what, this is the way things always go. So I've really kind of, that escalation part is the meat of Adamanto, right? Because we go from the Chang'an province where we have the Tangs and they're facing this Titan, and then you go on to the Caliphate, and then that's upping, right? I'm trying to think of the word. I can't think of the word right now. The escalation,
Escalation.
sorry.
Yeah.
And then you have the Byzantines, which is whoa over there until you kind of have a resolution, at least to those situations. But then we have to move on, right? Because this is an ongoing series. And then you have, how do you kind of up that threat level? How do you kind of like, one up yourself in that regard?
Right.
And but still you kind of don't run out of steam because of those human moments that I spoke about before, right? That
Yeah.
kind of brings it balance, and kind of brings things back down to earth, but then you kind of ratchet things up again. So there's that balance, that rhythm that you have to find with the storytelling.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. And I think that's like when we talked about it, and having those human moments in those mangas is a huge thing, and absolutely awesome that you're able to bring it to life, and can't keep seeing the escalation going on in Adamanto. It's gonna be awesome. Oh,
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, you ain't seen nothing yet.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, yeah. Well, thanks so much, Bryan. This has been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed our conversation, and this has been fantastic. So I can't wait to get to the next episode.
A pleasure as always.
All right. Thanks.